At 3:14 Universal Time Coordinated today, satellite imagery and maritime transponder data confirmed a massive, unannounced departure of U.S. Fifth Fleet assets from the port of Mina, Salman, in Bahrain. This is the first time since the height of the 1991 Gulf War that such a significant portion of the American naval presence in the Persian Gulf has gone dark simultaneously, moving into the open waters of the Arabian Sea without a standard CENTCOM briefing or a Department of Defense notice of exercise. I am watching these coordinates in real time, and what the data suggests is not a routine rotation, but a total strategic blackout designed to reposition high-value assets away from static coastal positions. This matters right now because it indicates that the military command structure is preparing for a kinetic event that the diplomatic corps is still trying to deny. The immediate consequence is a vacuum of power in the Strait of Hormuz, which has already sent maritime insurance premiums up by 400% in the last 6 hours. But while the ships are moving, the digital world is in a state of absolute chaos. A single leaked telegram message, purportedly from a Swiss intermediary in Tehran, sparked a $40 billion market fluctuation in less than 3 minutes. The message claimed that the back-channel negotiations in Muscat had finally reached a breaking point. Then, the situation took an even more surreal turn. Donald Trump released a late-night statement on his social media platform claiming a signed, sealed, and historic peace deal had been reached with the Iranian leadership. He described it as the greatest diplomatic achievement in the history of the Middle East, a document that would end 40 years of hostility. However, the response from Tehran was instantaneous and biting. Within minutes, the Iranian Foreign Ministry released a formal statement through IRNA, the state news agency, dismissing Trump's claims as the propaganda of a dying empire. They used the specific phrase, fake news, to describe the American announcement, asserting that no such deal exists and no such signatures have been provided. This leaves us with a terrifying discrepancy. If there is no deal, why are the American warships leaving their protected harbors in such a rush? If there is a deal, who is actually holding the pen in Tehran, and why is the official government calling it a lie? We are looking at a gap between reality and rhetoric that could determine the fate of the global economy by the time the sun rises. To understand how we reach this point, we have to look at the shadow diplomacy that has been operating outside the view of the State Department for the last 18 months. While official channels remained frozen, a private channel was established through Muscat, Oman. This wasn't staffed by career diplomats, but by a tight-knit circle of former intelligence officers and private sector intermediaries operating under the banner of what some are calling the Mar-a-Lago Manifesto. The flight logs of private Gulfstream jets belonging to these intermediaries show 17 trips to the Omani capital in the last quarter alone. While the mainstream media dismissed these reports as a delusion, the logistics suggest a highly coordinated, high-stakes negotiation was taking place in the shadows. The alleged deal, as outlined by sources close to the transition team, is built on a three-point peace framework that would fundamentally rewrite the security architecture of the Middle East. The first pillar is a total nuclear freeze, verified not just by the IAEA, but by a joint U.S.-Russian monitoring team. The second is the immediate lifting of all 2018-era sanctions, which have crippled the Iranian economy for years. The third and most controversial point is a mutual non-aggression pact that would theoretically see the United States withdraw a significant portion of its terrestrial footprint, dismantling its regional proxy
Week 4 of this
network.
war and the implications, consequences, questions tumble towards us,
for years, billions
tumble
in Iranian
towards the
assets
Prime
have been
Minister.
frozen in international
Prices at the
accounts.
pumps now,
According to
the
leaked
potential
financial
for costs to
flows,
spiral
3
in
major
the
European
future.
banks just locked their digital vaults, refusing to process any transactions related to these funds despite receiving what appeared to be authorization codes from an undisclosed source. This financial gridlock suggests that while the political deal may be signed in Florida, the global banking elite are not yet convinced of its legitimacy. They are waiting for a signal that the traditional power structures in Washington and Tehran are actually on board. The tension here is palpable. Trump is celebrating in Florida, treating the deal as a finished reality that will secure his legacy as the ultimate dealmaker. He is framing this as the moment he stopped the forever wars with a single stroke of a pen. But as he speaks to donors and supporters, something unthinkable is happening in the bunkers of Isfahan. Internal intelligence reports suggest that while the civilian government in Tehran was talking to Oman, the military wing was moving in the opposite direction. The disconnect isn't just between the US and Iran. It's between the negotiators and the men who actually control the missiles. The reaction from the Iranian hardliners has been nothing short of a mutiny. Shortly after the Foreign Ministry issued its rebuttal, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, released its own independent statement through its Telegram channels. They didn't just call the deal fake news. They called it a psychological warfare operation designed to sow discord within the Iranian ranks. This highlights a massive rift between Iran's civilian government, which is desperate for sanctions relief, and its military-industrial complex, which views any deal with the United States as a strategic surrender. This collision between the deep state of Iran and its elected officials is creating a dangerous instability. Our sources in the region indicate that the IRGC has effectively
continued its bombardment of Tehran. The country's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, saying President Trump had told him a deal was possible.
It is a warning to their own people that the shadow government is still in charge. This is a classic escalation tactic. You don't call a peace deal fake news unless you are planning a kinetic response that requires the world to be looking the other way. You create a fog of misinformation to mask your next move. While the talk of peace dominates the headlines, the reality on the ground is far more ominous. Satellite imagery analyzed in the last 6 hours shows that 14 missile silos in western Iran have entered what is known as active warm status. This means the liquid fuel is being cycled and the guidance systems are being calibrated. In military terms, this is the final step before a launch sequence can be initiated. It is a direct contradiction to the narrative of a non-aggression pact. It suggests that the IRGC is preparing to prove the deal is fake by taking an action that no peaceful nation would take. The missile variable is the ultimate wild card. If the IRGC launches even a single test flight in the next 12 hours, the Trump peace deal is dead before the ink is dry. The civilian leadership in Tehran may want the $150 billion, but the generals in the IRGC want to maintain their regional hegemony. They are currently operating as a state within a state, and their counterstrike against the fake news of peace is a signal to Washington that they are the ones who truly hold the power. The world is watching the civilian government, but they should be watching the silos in the desert. The fracture isn't just happening in Tehran. In Washington, a crisis of authority is unfolding that threatens to dismantle the American chain of command. A leaked internal memo, now known as the Dissent cable, has been circulating through the halls of the Pentagon. It is signed by 38 high-ranking officials, including several 3- and 4-star generals, who are openly refusing to acknowledge what they term unauthorized diplomatic breakthroughs. These officers are arguing that the peace deal bypasses statutory requirements for congressional oversight and ignores the standing intelligence assessments of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This is a moment of institutional betrayal. The military command structure is realizing that the executive branch is operating on a completely different set of data than the intelligence community. According to the leak, the CIA's Iran desk is currently operating on data that is 4 hours old, while the former president is claiming victory based on communications that are supposedly only 1 minute old. This intelligence gap is unprecedented. It means the people responsible for moving the Fifth Fleet out of Bahrain might not even know what the commander-in-chief, or the man who claims to be making the deals, is actually promising. In the world of military strategy, there is a term called Pattern C. It refers to a decoy peace, a tactic where a treaty is used to mask a massive repositioning of troops or a preparation for a preemptive strike. Several of the generals who signed the Dissent cable believe that the IRGC is using the Muscat negotiations as a Pattern C operation. They fear that the United States is being lured into a false sense of security while Iran
has been targeted by Iran after the attack on Saturday, and we have seen a barrage of drones and missiles, and now the extent of damage that was done to the U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. The extent of this damage now being revealed with this satellite imagery. Let's go across to Disha for more on this story. And Disha, we have seen since this attack on Saturday that Iran has been targeting various facilities and various U.S. assets in the Gulf countries, including, and now this damage that was done to the U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters has been revealed.
Absolutely, Gargi. So what we're seeing in these latest satellite visuals, it really shows just how much damage was done to the US Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, and really brings up very important questions regarding how the US is going to defend its bases from these escalating Iranian strikes on various US bases, not just in Bahrain. We've been seeing across the Gulf nations who house US bases, how they have been trying to not retaliate but protect these bases from Iranian strikes. But now today we're seeing this fresh satellite visual and imagery which really shows how an entire area of the American base in Bahrain was struck, and you can see the crater that has formed there on one of the shelters there on the base in the US Fifth Fleet headquarters base in Bahrain, and it really brings up very important questions as to how America is going to defend its bases from Iranian strikes, because we do know that various American warships are currently deployed across the surrounding essentially Iran. But how they're going to defend themselves really is an important question, because we're seeing that while most of the Iranian strikes that have been taking place over the past couple of days have not been successful, have not created a lot of damage, but now as this conflict escalates and continues, we're seeing that Iranian strikes are
the UAE and several European capitals. This isn't a routine extraction, it's a consolidation of resources. When intelligence assets are pulled back to the center, it's often a precursor to a high-intensity operation where those assets would be too vulnerable in the field. Silence in the Middle East isn't peace. It's the sound of a fuse burning in a vacuum. The Jerusalem silence is perhaps the most terrifying part of this 21-minute countdown. If Netanyahu remains vanished, it means the peace deal is being viewed by Israel as a direct threat to their national survival. The Mossad doesn't recall its agents for a celebration. They recall them for a war. As the Fifth Fleet moves out of Bahrain and the IRGC warms its silos, the missing piece of the puzzle is what Israel is preparing to do in the dark. If the US and Iran are talking fake news, Israel might be preparing for a real intervention. The geopolitical tension is already bleeding into your personal bank account. We have to talk about your money, because this fake news just hit the global supply chain tripwire. In the last hour of trading, crude oil prices experienced an unprecedented inverse move. They dropped 6% on the news of the peace deal, then spiked 12% the moment Tehran called it fake news. This kind of volatility is a nightmare for global markets, and it signifies that the global financial elite are attempting to short the peace deal before it's even verified. This brings us to the Carney-Trump conflict. While the political world is focused on the deal, the central bankers are looking at the liquidity. There are reports that $2.3 trillion in global wealth is currently sitting on a gold tripwire. Why? Because 4 BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, just moved $200 billion into their gold reserves the moment the Tehran rebuttal was published. They are hedging against the total collapse of the US dollar as the primary reserve currency for oil. If the peace deal fails and war breaks out, the dollar could face a systemic devaluation that we haven't seen in our lifetime. Now, we have to talk about your money, because this fake news just hit the global supply chain tripwire. If you think a conflict in the Persian Gulf won't affect you, look at the price of everything from gasoline to semiconductors. The single point of failure we mentioned earlier, that $40 billion market fluctuation, is just the beginning. The global elite are moving their assets into hard commodities because they no longer trust the signed documents of politicians. They are preparing for a dark winter of trade disruptions. Before we move to the final synthesis, I have to ask you to do something. They want you to be afraid and confused by these headlines. I want you to be informed. If you find this level of deep analysis valuable, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. We don't just report the news. We track the data that the mainstream media ignores. By joining this community, you're staying ahead of the curve and ensuring you're not the last to know when the lights go out. Your support allows us to keep digging into the flight logs and satellite data that tell the real story. We are now at the peak of this crisis. This 7 minutes to midnight metaphor has never been more literal. We have to consider what the military calls Option 9. This is the contingency for a test strike, a scenario where the IRGC launches a non-nuclear, high-precision missile at a non-human target, such as an empty tanker or a remote desert facility, simply to prove to the world that the Trump peace deal is a lie. If Option 9 is executed, the entire diplomatic framework collapses instantly. It would force the U.S. military to respond, regardless of what Donald Trump has signed at Mar-a-Lago. The nuclear clock is also ticking faster than ever. The IAEA just reported smoke on the horizon at the Natanz enrichment facility. In diplomatic terms, this usually refers to a rapid increase in centrifuge activity that creates a thermal signature visible to satellite sensors. It suggests that while the negotiators were talking about a nuclear freeze, the engineers in Natanz were actually accelerating the enrichment process. This is the ultimate betrayal of the three-point peace framework. If the IAEA cannot verify the freeze, the lifting of sanctions becomes legally and politically impossible. The final synthesis is a grim one. Trump's deal might actually be real in the sense that a document was signed by a faction of the Iranian civilian government. But if the shadow government in Tehran, the IRGC, and the hardline clerics won't sign it, the document is just a death warrant. It provides the justification for a hardline coup in Iran and a massive military escalation by the U.S. and Israel. We are seeing a decoy peace that is actually accelerating the path to war by creating a false sense of finality. Are you still operating on the assumptions of the old world? Or are you ready for what comes next? The old world believed that a signature on a piece of paper could stop a war. The new world knows that in a fractured state, a signature is often just a target. The fake news warning from Tehran is the most honest thing we've heard in the last 24 hours. It is a declaration that the peace deal is not a solution, but a catalyst for the next phase of the conflict. To recap the last 72 hours, we have seen a private diplomatic channel bypassed by a public announcement, leading to a total breakdown in communication between Washington, Tel Aviv, and Tehran. The Fifth Fleet is in the Arabian Sea, the IRGC is at active warm status, and the Israeli leadership has vanished into the pit. This is the reality behind the headlines. So, what could happen in the next 24 to 48 hours? There are three realistic scenarios that we are tracking closely. Scenario 1 is the silent implementation. This is where the $150 billion is quietly released to the civilian government in Tehran, and they use that leverage to purge the IRGC hardliners. This is the best case, and would lead to a genuine de-escalation, but it requires the U.S. generals to stand down and the IRGC to accept their own obsolescence. Given the current dissent in the Pentagon, this scenario has a low probability. Scenario 2 is the proxy explosion. Unable to stop the deal through official channels, the IRGC orders its proxies in Lebanon and Yemen to launch a massive coordinated strike against regional targets. This would effectively kill the peace deal by forcing a military response, allowing the IRGC to claim they are defending the nation against American aggression. This scenario has a high probability and would explain the Muscat exodus we are seeing. Scenario 3 is the unilateral Israeli strike. Fearing that the Trump deal gives Iran a path to a nuclear weapon through deceptive freezes, Israel decides to take matters into its own hands. They strike the Natanz and Isfahan facilities while the U.S. is distracted by its own internal political and military fractures. This would trigger a total regional war and render the Muscat negotiations completely irrelevant. The ships are moving, the generals are resigning, and the peace deal is currently the most dangerous document on Earth. It has created a vacuum of certainty that is being filled by military maneuvers and financial panic. The tripwire has been pulled, and the world is now waiting for the first kinetic move to decide which version of reality is true. Whether it's a missile launch or a banking collapse, The fake news of today will be the hard truth of tomorrow. I want to hear from you. How is this story being covered where you live right now? Are you seeing the same peace headlines? Or is your local news highlighting the military movements we've discussed? Also, which of the three scenarios do you consider most likely? The silent implementation, the proxy explosion, or the unilateral strike? Let me know in the comments below, and let's get a real-time perspective from around the world. We'll continue tracking this situation as the data comes in. The only question left is, where will you be when the truth finally breaks? We'll be here, watching the screens and the silos. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next update.